Hey, are you hungry? Well, you're in luck. Meat and Three is back for season 16. I'm Taylor Early, and we've got a whole new batch of reporters I am so excited to introduce you to.
Hi, there. I'm Elizabeth Fisher.
Asha McElroy.
Sam Girardi.
Jessica Gingrich.
Hannah from Wisconsin.
I'm a swing dancing audio engineer.
I am a future registered dietitian nutritionist.
I'm from New York, and I love rice and beans.
My favorite food of all time is a shrimp burrito.
I love watermelon.
We've also got a bonus podcast for you called Behind the Internship. 3 of our reporters will take you along to show how they developed stories for this very show, Meat and Three.
Hi, I'm Danielle Flitter, a plant-based chef from Philadelphia, living in Mexico City.
I'm Sophia Hooper. I'm a bartender based in Portland, Maine.
My name is Addison Austin Liu. I am a chef and food journalist from Salt Lake City, Utah, and my favorite food is Peruvian.
Rice and beans.
Hand-drawn noodle soup.
So tune in to enjoy a square meal for your ears. And I hope you saved a little room for dessert.
This episode is brought to you with support from Fairplate. Tickets and information at FAREPLATE.com.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. We're a member-supported podcast network broadcasting over 35 weekly shows from Bushwick, Brooklyn. This year, we're celebrating 10 years of food radio. For the past decade, we've been taking you behind the scenes of farms, restaurants, breweries, school cafeterias, and more. It's been 10 years, and we're just getting started. Find us at heritageradionetwork.org.
Welcome to The Line. I'm your host, Eli Sussman. Excited that I'll be traveling down to Charleston for the 2019 Food and Wine Festival in just a few short days. We will be recording live from the park, and you can listen to tons of amazing HRN interviews by tuning in starting on March 8th. And if you're going to be down there for the event, I'd love to meet you. So come by the park, say what's up. We're going to be in the industry tent in the back area, and look for our Heritage Radio Network studio. So hope to see you if you're going to be down there. Now on to the show. My guest today is Jaime Young. He's the chef and partner of Sunday in Brooklyn. He's a 2017 Star Chef Rising Star Chef Award winner. He's previously worked at 11 Madison Park, Gray's, 10 Downing, and he was the chef de cuisine for 3 years at Atera, where every year he helped the restaurant retain its Michelin stars. In 2016, he partnered with veterans from Major Food Group to open Sunday in Brooklyn, located in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. It's always been one of my favorite restaurant spaces in all of New York. It's very beautiful. We'll talk about the interiors of it along with the food, of course. The nearly all-day restaurant has a casual service style, and it's become a neighborhood favorite. Today we'll be talking about learning from the best chefs in the world, how to move forward and create your own style, foraging, what it's like to both own and be the chef of a restaurant, and so much more. Jaime, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, although our restaurants are really nothing alike, mine is quick service. Yours has, I'm going to say it's about 50 seats-ish.
Way more.
70?
I think a total.
Oh, with the upstairs, right?
Yeah, it's like 169.
Okay, so your restaurant is huge. Mine is small. You have a plated style. You have full service. So they're nothing alike, but we are both chef owners. It comes with a unique set of challenges. So I am personally very interested in wondering, what is the most challenging part about your day in the context of you being both a chef and an owner of the restaurant, a huge restaurant?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few challenges I think that come with having a big restaurant and being the chef owner. I don't nearly get to spend as much time cooking and running service. There's so many other aspects of the restaurant and the business that I have to pay attention to at this point. So it's really cooking between meetings and planning. Business operations and, trying to get ahead of the curve for the following week and kind of, put out any fires I need to.
Did you expect that? Obviously, you have a cooking pedigree and you spent a long time as a CDC, which is a high leadership role in a very busy, well-known restaurant that had, I would assume it was fully booked every single night at Atera for the most part. So you've dealt with a lot of these things prior, but did you feel prepared or did you feel blindsided when you opened up Sunday?
It's weird because every time I go to a new restaurant, it's like, this is the hardest place I've ever worked. It can't get much harder than this. So everything else should be, way easier. But come to, think about it, and like the reality of the situation is there's always a different kind of hard and challenge. So, Sunday is its own difficulty and challenge, So it's vastly different in its challenges.
You come from such a intensely fine dining background. You've worked at places with multiple Michelin stars where the attention to precision is at such a high level. And now you've just mentioned that you're not in the kitchen for every single minute of every single service. You have to deal with, who knows, payroll, maybe something breaks and it's on you to call a person to fix it, right? So things are pulling you away. How does that feel when you've been like food focused, plating focused, service focused, and now you sometimes things pull you out of the kitchen?
To be honest with you, it's uncomfortable. I don't think it's something you really get used to all the time. But I do have a really great team, so I rely on them to withhold the standards all the time. So I think that really helps, having a really good management staff that you can rely on, you can trust to keep everything in line every day. Is really, really important, so that I can step away and, work on different projects, work on the operation of the business and make sure it's actually producing money and it's on track. And I think that a lot of the things that I had to do in fine dining had less to do with operations. It had more to do with the standard, the excellence, the execution, the vision of the chef, making sure everyone was in line. So it was more day-to-day, hands-on in the kitchen with the staff. I think with a more casual neighborhood restaurant, there are so many other variables that the guest that you have is a little bit different than the guest you would get at a fine dining restaurant. They're a little bit more casual, laid back. They want really great service, but they don't want it to be too fussy, so you have to kind of accommodate for almost the difference in clientele.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about Sunday a little bit later, and just that is so interesting because the style of where you were to where you are now, some people might think, well, it's just a restaurant. Like, you make food, you serve food. But really, even just how you the tables were set at Atisha to how they're set at Sunday in Brooklyn, and everything else that goes beyond that is like light years different.
Totally.
At least to you.
Yeah, for sure.
and people that think about that and pay close attention.
Yeah.
I want to go back now to Long Island, to your childhood. Did you always want to open up a restaurant? How did you get involved in the business? I know you went to culinary school, but prior to really making that decision, like, where was your head at as a teenager or as like a young kid?
Yeah, it's weird because I'm not 100% sure where this came from. I know, like, when I was like 12 or 13, I wanted to do it, like, without even thinking about anything else I ever wanted to do. I just wanted to do this. And my mom's like, well, you never cook at home, so I don't understand why you would want to do this. Like, where does this interest come from? And I was like, I really don't know. I just want to do it. And I think maybe, like, I used to spend a lot of time with my grandmother. She cooked a lot. My mom's mother cooked a ton. It's like in the family. My mom cooked for us all the time. I used to spend a lot of afternoons with my grandmother watching Julia Childs, and I think maybe falling asleep unconsciously she got in my head, and that's kind of where it came from. But besides that, I'm not really sure why, to be honest with you. But while I was in high school, I just took I took a job as like like a deli counter guy at this like Italian pork store. Mm-hmm. So one of my
classic Long Island
totally
job,
yeah. So Freddie was my boss. He was pretty amazing, and he's always like butchering meat, making sausages and things like that. And I was making fresh mozzarella, and I'm like slicing deli meat super thin for everyone because everyone's like really particular in Long Island about really, really thin meat.
Yeah.
That was like kind of my first taste of like hands-on like food, kind of experience. And then I went to work for this one restaurant as a busboy. It was a pretty good restaurant. It was like an Italian-American, pretty progressive at the time. I think, it was like 2004 or something like that. So it was a really good restaurant in Long Island, which is, kind of rare.
Yeah.
I learned a lot about the kitchen. Like, there was just one chef and a sous chef, and there was just two guys cooking for like 50 people, and they had their, all their sauces and bain maries, and they were just like cooking so fast. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. Like, it looks so fun. I was like really enthralled at that point. So at that moment, I decided I was for sure going to go to culinary school. I really wasn't sure what that meant, to be honest with you. So, my mom did a ton of research for me, and she's like, all right, we're either going to do CIA or Johnson & Wales are the best schools. I'm like, okay. So we went to Johnson & Wales, and we went to the campus. I had no idea like how I would decide if one was better than the other, to be honest with you. I just didn't know. So I kind of just rolled the dice on it, and I went and, I did 4 years there. My mom's like, you need a bachelor's degree. And I was like, all right, cool. Let's just, we'll do that. And I spent 4 years there, but for me, it was super important to actually get real line experience because I just didn't get any there. It was, 30 kids in a class. You do like one dish for 7 hours, and I'm like, this is not doing it. I really didn't like it, to be honest with you. I didn't think it was really preparing me for what I really needed to know. So I had this like fear that I wasn't gonna be ready to go for when I came back to New York, because I had this, everyone has this big idea of what New York cooking is and how scary it must be, and I just wanted to make sure that I can walk into the kitchen anywhere in New York and at least hit the ground running in some respect.
Sure.
So I went to work for this one guy on Federal Hill in Rhode Island. His name was Walter Potenza. It was just like an Italian restaurant, but he was super particular about how clean we cooked. We worked, changing containers, scrubbing the grout and the floors. Like, he was so particular, and like I really learned quite a lot in that moment on how to cook and how to like really organize myself and stay really clean, how important that was, and the joy of organization and cleanliness, right?
Yeah.
Because that is like, 50 or more % of cooking is cleaning and organizing.
Yeah, just generally the preparation is a lot of what you hear from, like, the juxtaposition of like my first job to I got a real professional job is like upping the ante on how well you're prepared for service, right? Like just having your mise en place in place. And a lot of first jobs, they don't even call it mise en place. They're just like, have your little boxes of stuff ready, right? Like you don't even know what that word is at that time. So you start working in Rhode Island, and he's teaching you all of these techniques. You're learning, I assume, how to cook meat and fish and things that you maybe saw in culinary school but hadn't quite put into action yet. Like, this is your first I'm on the line during service. Like
real pressure.
Yeah.
Like, you get in, you have to prep, and then people are sitting down, so you need to be ready, So for sure, definitely felt pressure even in school, like, I didn't touch a fish the entire 4 years I was there. And I was like freaking out. I was like, well, if I can't butcher fish or do any of that, like, for me, that's like a hole in my game. I need to fill that hole somehow.
Yeah.
So.
And as someone who didn't go to culinary school, I'm always curious. Now culinary school has become it's become very expensive.
Yeah.
And it has become really just almost a direct pipeline into fine dining. It is quite rare, I think, that people go to 4 years of culinary school and then don't try to go somewhere with a Michelin star. Like, is that what you found when you were there, or was it a different vibe?
To be honest with you, like, Johnson & Wales, they had this thing where they guaranteed you like placement 90%, 95%, whatever. But they were mostly sponsored by like Marriott hotels, so of course you can get easily placed.
That's how they place 95% of people.
If you want to work in a hotel, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I just wanted something more particular. I wanted more. I wanted to cook with the best of them. That's what I wanted.
Yeah.
If I was gonna put all those hours in, my mom's always like, you realize, you're not gonna have your weekends. You're gonna be working long hours. She was like trying to deter me for a minute, let me know, warn me. And I was like, all right, well, I don't really care. But if I was going to do that and was going to make that sacrifice, I wanted it to be with the best of them. I wanted to be one of the best,
She was being your mom. She was trying to prepare you for the fact that you've chosen a profession that kind of sucks and is incredibly demanding.
Yeah.
And you don't get to clock out at 5:30 and say, today was a hard day. You got to stay until the end of end of that hard day.
It's true.
So how do you end up at EMP? What's the next step in this postgraduate realm?
So I'm nearing my end. I have a few months left, and there's like career counselors. They're like, well, I can place you here, I can place you there. And to be honest with you, they didn't really follow through with a lot of what they had promised. So I went and did it on my own. So, I found out about 11 Madison Park. It was a restaurant, with Carrie Heffernan beforehand. It was a big, beautiful restaurant. I found out that Daniel Hume was coming. I didn't, to be honest with you, know much about him. So I immediately just started Google searching and like looking him up, looking up what he did at Campton Place, reading his menu at 11 Madison Park. I didn't even know what some of the ingredients in the menu items were, because a lot of it was like kind of French techniques and like things I hadn't been exposed to. So I was like, my God, I gotta go. So I sent an email and I was like, they're never gonna get back to me, right? So the exec sous or CDC at the time, Jason Franny, he got back to me like the next day, and I think I freaked out. I was like, holy shit, like, I can't believe they got back to me. So he was like, yeah, when can you come and stage? I was like, I'm not really sure what that word means. So he's like, all right, well, come down and trail for a couple days, see what you think. So I drove down from Rhode Island. It's like 4.5 hours. I get there. I'm like at my mom's house getting all my knives. I didn't even have any good knives. I just had shitty knives. I didn't even know like what I needed, you know? Because I'd never been on a real serious New York trail before, especially in a kitchen that big.
Sure.
And I threw up outside at the park right before I walked in because I had, you know, I was like, it was so intimidating. And you get in there and like you see people in toques just running. Like everyone is running. And, you know, it's like he like just got there. So, like, everything is changing. So everyone's freaking out. Everyone's running around. And I see Daniel standing at the pass. You know, he's like looking at the tickets. He's like talking to people. And then he looks over to me and he puts his hand out and he goes, hi, I'm Daniel. And he shook my hand. And I was like, holy shit. Like, he shook my hand. Like, that's pretty cool. So I got there. I thought I knew something about cooking. And, you know, it turns out I really didn't know shit. So it's
sort of like the Knicks asked you to come. They're like, just come and shoot a couple jump shots, and we'll see if we can, you know, put you on the squad. So you get there and you do what, a 1-day stage?
Yeah, they're like, hey, listen, come back. I was like, okay, cool. Just want to let you know I'm finishing up school, so I can only do weekends right now. And when I'm done, I'll just go. So I was basically going back and forth from Rhode Island to finishing class and going to work on the weekends, you know, working like 16 or 18 hours back to back. And like I was living basically at my mom's house, which is an hour outside. So I had to take the Long Island Railroad in. And then I had to try to get the last train out without saying, hey, chef, like my last train's coming. Can I go now? Because you can't say that, right? So I'm like, anything else you need? And I would just do everything super fast, you know? And they were like, wow, he takes initiative. I'm like, great. And then I would sprint from 11 Madison Park all the way to Penn Station to make the last train, because otherwise I'd have to wait an hour to sit on the train for an hour and then be back in the morning. And then I would drive back to Rhode Island, finish up, and then as a matter of fact, my first real day at EMP was actually graduation day, and I missed my graduation because I didn't really care about that. For me, the most important thing was working there. I didn't want anyone to take my job, so I got there and I was like, I'm fucking here. Like, I don't care about graduation. That was bullshit anyway. You know what I mean?
So when you started there, did people feel that it was different? Did you hadn't been in a New York kitchen yet,
yeah.
But was there an energy that people were kind of whispering? Was there a percolating there that things there would maybe grow into what it now is? Or do you think it was still too young in its infancy with Daniel Hum at the beginning?
Because at the time when I was working there, if you said EMP to anyone, they were like, what? They had no idea.
Right.
And I was like, oh, cool. It's like magic. Like you're gonna know this name soon enough, you know? To be honest with you, like the attention to detail, the food we were doing, it was beautiful. Like the flavors were amazing. The cooking was awesome. Like the dishes were, you know, something I've never really been exposed to before. You know, I remember when I finally got to the hotline for lunch, I had to make 12 foam sauces, you know? Like by the time I was done tasting them, I had pretty much drank a gallon of cream at that point. You know what I mean? Between chef tasting it, Jason tasting it, the sous chef tasting it, readjusting, like, you know, it was on its way. For sure, you knew it was definitely going to be one of the best restaurants in the city.
What are some things that you learned from that kitchen that you now lean on now that you're in a leadership role? It could be something that specifically you saw one of the sous or even Chef Hum do that you've carried with you until then.
There's a couple of, actually, EMP was a turning point in my career, even though it was pretty young. I think every chef is tested to some degree, and to the point where they're like, should I do this? Am I good enough to do this? Should I quit? And that place for sure drove me to that point. And once you hit that breaking point, you make a decision, right? And I remember I had a really rough service, and Daniel came in, and he was like really pissed off, and I felt really terrible, you know? I didn't want to like take down the service. I you know, it was important to me, you know? Mm-hmm. And then after service, I was like, chef, you know, maybe I'm just not good enough. Maybe I should spend time in the private dining with one sous chef. And, you know, maybe I just need to learn more. Maybe I'm just not ready for this. And the next day, he threw me on entremet for dinner service. And it clicked. All of a sudden, I did it. I could do it. And from then on, he just kept giving me the opportunity to keep moving through the line. And before you knew it, I went from, I think I'm terrible at this, to, you know, torn out of the kitchen. And that was, for me, the most important moment in my career where I realized I can do anything I want. I can do whatever if I can do this, I can do anything. I can aspire for more. And that was the most important thing I think a chef's really ever done for me, especially young in my career. And then obviously I think the most important thing is, to look at the lead cook in the kitchen and aspire to be that person when you're the younger cook, because they're working their ass off. They're usually the best cooks. Their tricks, the way they cook, like your meat cook and your fish cook have different ways of like staying ahead in service and how they actually cook fish in a quick moment. Like you can learn so many tricks and cooking techniques from those guys because they're the craftiest and they're the quickest, So it's almost magical as a young cook to watch these guys do their thing.
Did you ever go to Chef Hum either before you left or since and make any reference to that moment and say something along the lines of, thanks for throwing me into the fire? Has he ever referenced the fact that he kind of believed in you? Because that moment could have gone in a totally different way. He could have thought to himself, you know what, maybe I should pull it back a little bit. But he actually, he
stepped on the gas.
Yeah. He said, oh, you don't think you can make it here? Let me push you into the absolute limit of what your capabilities could potentially be.
I never talked to him about it. I'm sure he does that for a lot of his cooks. I mean, that's just his personality, I think. For me, I was there for a little over a year. I was working a ton of hours. I was commuting. It was killing me. And we were doing this changeover from the old kitchen to the new one. So we had this issue where cooks were walking out left and right. They didn't want to do it. It was too hard. So there was a small group of us that were just trying to fill in and fill in the gap. So it really kind of wore me down. So I had to give my notice. And he's like, you shouldn't do that. And, he was for sure right. I should have taken a break and maybe came back for sure. I thought about it. I was just really young at that point. So in hindsight, I probably should have went back. But there was this one moment he used to come to Atera a couple times a year. And there was this one moment he came in and, I had been promoted to CDC. I was there. I was running the kitchen for at least 6 or 7 months. And, he looked over at me and he's like, come here. And I was like, all right, what's up, chef? And he's like, I just want to let you know I'm really proud of you. And he shook my hand. And I was like, for me, that was the most satisfying. The approval from him, someone that kind of pushed me in the right direction to see where I'm at and give me that kind of approval. It was super important.
We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to chat more about Atera. Stick with us here on Heritage Radio.
This episode is brought to you with support from Fairplate, a taste of Ireland in New York, taking place Saturday, March 9th at the Rag Trader. At Fairplate, you can sip and savor Irish whiskey, cheese, grass-fed beef, and more. Tickets and information at fareplate.com.
Hey, are you enjoying this podcast? Heritage Radio Network has plenty more. My name is Kathy Irway, and I'm the host of Eat Your Words here on HRN. Every week I sit down with food writers to talk about their newest work, from colorful cookbooks to food memoirs to exposés on the food industry. It's all meaty topic for discussion. You can find Eat Your Words wherever you listen to podcasts and on heritageradionetwork.org.
Welcome back to The Line. My guest today is Chef Jaime Young. He is the chef and co-owner of Sunday in Brooklyn. Before the break, we were talking about your first job, a very influential way to start your career, which is you jumped on the line at EMP, but really it was one of your next stops that had a huge amount of influence in shaping the way that you think about food. And that was at Atera working with Chef Matthew Leitner. Can you please tell us a little bit about that job and working underneath and then alongside him, please?
Yeah. So that was one of those new moments where I was scared shitless. I had never traveled to Spain. I knew that like he was like really deep into like Mugaritz and the style and this like really creative, molecular idea, and like, also he spent some time at Noma, and like there's a lot of progressive ideas that he was working on that I really wanted to get into that. I went from kind of fine dining French cuisine, worked for Grey Coons, did a little bit of like, kind of rustic French cooking with Tony Maz in Cambridge. I learned a lot from him, and then at this point I wanted to learn modern style. So we started in the owner's basement in her house. Again, I've had no experience with, hydrocolloids, things like that. I didn't really know much about it. So I was a bit of a disadvantage, but I knew I was a really good cook. And I knew I could handle myself in any situation. So, I get there. He's super quiet. He doesn't really say anything. He just rattles off a list of things to work on. I'm just like, I don't get it. He doesn't say hello. How do I know if like he hates me or he likes me? So it was like intense. Like it was so intense. And I was like, cool. I can't wait to keep going with this. So we did a ton of R&D out of that kitchen, this like normal basement kitchen, for about 3 or 4 months, I believe. And then we finally got into the production kitchen at Atera, which was this big, beautiful, almost laboratory, if you will. Like ton of space, everything you ever wanted in a kitchen, like hyper clean. And Matt's like a stickler for perfection and cleanliness. So we deep clean that kitchen like 5 times a day. So it was like something I've never experienced. But you know what? He always said, like, we would get in the morning. He's like, all right, let's clean. And I'm just looking around. I'm like, we cleaned before we left. I'm like, I was super confused. But he explained it to me, and I was like, he's like, listen, it just sets the tone. Like, we clean vigorously. We wipe down the kitchen. We start fresh. It clears the mind. And I'm like, great. So we started getting into this rhythm where we had this like cleaning schedule, and it would reset us every time. And we would, clean up what we were doing, and then we would start fresh. And you know what? It really did clear our minds up quite a bit. I mean, it was an interesting kind of approach that I'd never really thought about before.
I totally see what you're saying. Sometimes you can get into this, you tend to spread out where you're like, oh, there's 3 projects, 4 projects going at the same time. And then you realize that everything's working, but you're not really quite focusing on any of them with the level of detail that you want, and obviously what he's expecting.
For sure.
So
we would do one project at a time.
Yeah.
That was it.
So the way that menu was constructed, for people that have never been in there and aren't familiar with it, can you talk a little bit about how sourcing of ingredients and also technique, what they are they traditional, what Atera kind of does?
Oh, that's from Nebraska. So he has this deep-seated like love for Midwestern like ideas, but at the same time he's traveled the world and he spent a lot of times at some like really amazing kitchens. For instance, he spent a lot of time in Mugaritz, and like he's been exposed to so many ingredients and so many ideas and techniques. So a lot of that was kind of infused. And I would say towards the end of his tenure there, we were starting to kind of really dive into like that love that he had of kind of Midwestern ideas. But I mean, in the beginning, it was mostly a lot of these like kind of modern progressive ideas coming out of like, like Europe and Spain that was kind of still fresh in his mind. So we were doing a lot of those things that were, I guess, trendy at the moment.
How was the restaurant received at the beginning?
To be honest with you, we were working like crazy. And we had a small core team. They're all my family. Like I speak to every one of them every day. It was like the tightest team I've ever worked with. And like that one job that you had that you like, the lead cook, this guy, the sous chef, like we were just so tight because we were in it together. We were trying to achieve something that I don't think was really happening at the time. And Matt's ideas were so progressive in a way that I didn't even understand how to like even like start working on some of those ideas. He had to give us a lot of direction, and it was amazing to kind of see something I thought was impossible just happen and become something that's everyday to us. So I mean, it was incredible, to be honest with you.
How did you end up being in charge of the kitchen there? Did Matt leave? Did he promote you to CDC while he was still there? What was the trajectory for you within Atera, since you spent quite a bit of time there?
Yeah, about 5 years. So I started off as their protein cook, the meat cook. I did all the fish and the meat butchery and everything that happened to do with sauces and meat for the most part, and fish. We had an amazing executive sous chef. Her name was Victoria Blamey. She was an unbelievable technician. Her palate was insane. Her leadership was intense. And she really set the tone for the kitchen, which was pretty amazing. Her and Matt worked really well together. I think they worked previously at Mugaritz a long time ago. That's how they knew each other. But it was a pretty intense dynamic. And then they had offered myself and my one of my brothers, Zach Hunter, who's now in Austin at the Brewers table, to be promoted as sous chefs. And we were just like, okay, like, she's like, if you do this, it's like a year commitment. And I was already like, okay, do I want to, you always start to question, like, it's been a really tough year. We had no idea what was going on. We had no idea how we were being perceived. We had everyone coming in. I remember some of the chefs that I've always dreamed of cooking for were coming in, sitting at the counter, like right in front of me. It was like intense. Like, it was amazing. And then she decided to move on. And then it was just Zach and I. And then we were kind of doing it for a while. And then he decided to move on. And then I was basically doing everything as a sous chef, like ordering everything and trying to manage everything. And then he just promoted me from there. I kind of just assumed the role as everyone started to kind of do their own thing.
Did you end up having, at that time, a lot control over things that went on the menu? Were you still executing really Matt's vision? I'm curious if you can even determine, like, percentage-wise, what type of ideas were you throwing out there that were really sticking on the menu?
Not a ton, to be honest with you. Matt had so many ideas all the time that he wanted to get out there. Our menu was gigantic. Like, it was a lot, you know? And he had just so many ideas at the time that we just had to keep working on them. Like, he'd come in and we had this, like, library place, and it had, like, this clear board, and before you knew it, there was 15 new things on there. And you're like, okay, how do I make a beet, taste like that? He would take vegetables with a texture, and he would say, all right, we're going to make this texture of this vegetable. And I'm like, I'm not sure. How do we do that, So there was, like, a lot of interesting exploration that we had to do all the time. So we're really always working on his ideas of what things could be. So we were always kind of like, I guess you could say, experimenting nonstop. I always took control of all of the dietaries, the vegetarian menus, the dairy-free things. So I got to explore a lot with that. So that's where he let me kind of take the role and the reins on the food. And I would be basically with the sous chefs always R&Ding these new ideas that he was coming up with nonstop.
You definitely have you've spoken before about you enjoy foraging. You are someone who really enjoys digging deep into sourcing, locality, sustainability, just getting to the actual core root of what the product is, where it came from.
Yeah.
Is that something that you had before that was then magnified, emphasized by what happened at Atera, or is that something that you didn't actually quite think about that much before you got to Atera, and then it happened there?
Well, I mean, for sure, when I worked for Tony Ma's, like, the quality of the ingredients was the utmost importance. He had, like, 50 different farm purveyors. Like, he got his meat from a specific place. He was, like, calling, Brown Trading at, like, 4 a.m. to make sure that Rod was telling him what was the freshest fish. Like, we were getting fish in rigor mortis nonstop. Like, I couldn't even butcher the fish because I had to wait, like, 2 days for it to, like, relax, So I kind of, like, I really got the jump off from Tony, and as I went to Matt, I didn't really know a ton of about foraging. I just, you read about it, no one's doing a whole thing, and, like, everyone starts foraging, and you get all these really rare, awesome ingredients that are in the moment. And we had a forager at Atera, and they kept bringing in all these new ingredients, and it was just blowing my mind, all these different flavor profiles, textures, and things that we can actually have in different parts of the season. So it really kind of blossomed at Atera, and then I became really close with a good friend of mine named Will Horowitz. He has Duck's Eatery over in the Village. He takes me all the time and teaches me a lot. So we always go to his spots. He shows me all the different things and, like, what to look for. Like, when we're looking for the elusive morel mushroom, like, what kind of trees we're looking for to find them. And, Will has taught me quite a lot on my own to how to actually go and find the right things. So it's, like, kind of a combination of people.
What's really fascinating for me about the next step in your career is that if I were to have put money down, I'd say, oh yeah, Jamie's going to get a 14-seat small basement joint, and he's going to do a very sleek tasting menu.
That was the idea.
It didn't happen.
No, it didn't happen.
So, so if that was the idea, and now you're at a 100-some seat restaurant, which is almost an all-day spot. You do breakfast, you do a midday, you do dinner. Plating's still beautiful. It's still sourced very responsibly, but it's a casual restaurant.
Yeah.
How did all that happen?
So Matt had left Atera. We welcomed in Ronnie Emborg, fantastic chef. I knew I had to kind of go out on my own and start doing my own thing. So after everything was kind of settled, we parted ways. And then serendipitously, I ran into my business partner, Adam Landsman, at the market. I was just there at the market. One of my good friends was, selling produce for a farm, and we were hanging out. And I'm like, oh my God, Adam, what's going on? I haven't seen him in like 10 years. We worked together at Gray's for Grey Kuntz in Midtown. And then he's like, I don't know, what are you doing? I'm like, nothing right now. Like, he's like, I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, we're working on a restaurant. Let's have a drink. I'm like, okay. So we had a beer. I had at that point, my friend Scott, who has Charter Coffee somewhere in Williamsburg, he was our sommelier at Atera for a long time, and he's like, hey, I have these investors, they want to do something, would you be interested? I was like, cool. So this was like, yes, I'm gonna get my fine dining thing, I'm gonna transition right into it, I'm gonna figure this out, it's gonna be awesome, right? Turns out it was just taking too long. I couldn't really afford to wait much longer, and Adam's like, hey, listen, why don't you do some R&D for this restaurant concept me and my business partner Todd have going, and we'll just pay you, and then you can just train someone, and then that's it. You get paid and you can work on things while you're waiting on your project, and you can help us with ours. So I was like, sure, no problem. So I started R&Ding full-time out of my apartment for Sunday in Brooklyn, and it was super interesting. I would do tastings for them like weekly out of my apartment, and again, like waiting for this thing to happen. It's not happening, and he's like, Adam's like a very reasonable person. He's like, listen, like, come on as a full partner with us. Let's do this, and then I'll help you find a space, and we'll get you the investment for that. So, taking a page out of like David Chang's book, right? Like, doing a really great restaurant that services the local neighborhood. It's a great business. It makes good money. It's sustainable and supportable, financially. And the reality is, fine dining and things like that, it's just not sustainable financially. So unless you have a backer that has a ton of money, like it's tricky. Mm-hmm. It's really tricky. The margins are so slim with food. Like, you have to be careful. So, I started to grow up a little bit. I'm like, you know what? Like, I think, and through Adam and Todd, they're like very operations heavy and super smart. They're like, we need to make something stable and financially viable for all of us before we can do anything like that. And it made a ton of sense to me. And at the same time, like, feeding the neighborhood is not a bad thing. It's great to feed everyone every day.
The two partners that you've just mentioned, Todd and Adam, so they were respectively the COO and Director of Operations within Major Food Group. Yep. So they obviously have a ton of experience on their end. You've got a wonderful resume that you're bringing in. On paper, it seems like you guys find the investors, you find the finances to do Sunday in Brooklyn in like 2 minutes. Everybody says this is the this is the dream team. This is a three-headed monster. Yeah, is that a correct assessment? Was it easy to fundraise? Was it difficult to fundraise? Well, how did that process work out for you guys?
So Adam, just like the three-headed monster, like, so I'm good at the food part, building my kitchen team, all that. That's what I do. Todd is like super strategic operations, like hyper intelligent. He managed a bunch of restaurants in the Cheesecake Factory for 13 years, and there was an article about how if our hospitals, operated like Cheesecake Factory did, there'd be no sick people in this country. Like, their waste is like 0.5%, like everything's made in house. And like, when I found all these details out, my head exploded. I was like, wow, this whole time I thought Cheesecake Factory was this thing, but it's really actually not. It's actually not bad for whatever it's doing. So Todd is that operations guy, and Adam, he's the go-getter. He negotiates, he finds people, he socializes, he knows, basically everyone from just working at all these different establishments. People like, hey, when you open a restaurant, I'd love to invest in you. So he had quite a bit of people to call to see how that would work out. And he gathered a bunch of people, and they all agreed to it. And we had majority of our investors locked in. I can tell you, from just watching how stressed out he was about it, like, fundraising is not easy. When someone says they're in, that's something different than here's the check, right? So like, totally. It's hard. It's super hard.
When you formalized your relationship with them and you all kind of decided what your roles would be in the context of the restaurant and you launched to open it, was there any discussion, any stress, strain at all about what the overall vision would be, or were you all super on the same page about it being like a neighborhood joint first and foremost?
the neighborhood joint idea for sure, because we all live in the neighborhood. It was
Mm-hmm.
important to us to give a restaurant to the neighborhood that people can come to all the time and really enjoy without, just carefree. It's awesome. That was important to us, first and foremost. The vision, however, changed quite a bit. Mostly because in the beginning we were in a space that we had to change into, right? So the idea of Sunday in Brooklyn for Adam and Todd before kind of I came into the picture was something else. And then, when we get into the space, it's a little more challenging. It doesn't quite fit the idea. So we start pivoting to make it function within the space, because the space in itself, although, very big, it's a challenging space. It's 3 floors. It looks like there's a lot of space, but it's kind of like all the spaces are in these random crevices, and it's a little bit tight. And so we kept pivoting, A, for the functionality of the restaurant, and B, we were listening to what the neighborhood really wanted. And what I was cooking for dinner originally was, I think a little bit too futzy. And for me, it wasn't, but coming from where I was at, that's where my head was at. So I really started to kind of, shed some of the useless things that I was doing that really didn't make sense for that restaurant, that concept. And we were just kind of looking towards the neighborhood and seeing what they really wanted to eat every day, and just constantly reviewing the menus and pivoting and brainstorming how to, be more accessible, which was the point.
Do you ever wake up in the morning and say to yourself, I really wish that I could source X from this location, put it on the menu, and charge X amount of dollars for it
every day,
and the restaurant doesn't allow it?
It's not possible. The reality is, there's a lot of amazing farmers out there. There's a lot of amazing ingredients out there, but I think that the public is not quite educated enough to understand the real costs of an ingredient, how much it costs a farmer to actually produce that ingredient, and then when we get it and then we produce it and put labor into it, how much at the end of the day it really does cost to put on the plate in a way that makes not us greedy in any way, but financially viable to sell it to someone in a way that makes sense for both of us. So it's been really challenging, and I have to be really picky about which ingredients we can use, because as a neighborhood restaurant, I can't charge more than $14 or $15 for an appetizer. It's just not doable.
So yeah, food costs are still...
It's insane.
They still are the lurking monster at all times. Yeah.
And now labor.
Totally. Let's talk a little bit about labor and also food costs and rent in New York.
Yeah.
And the extreme challenges that exist. I think some people that might be listening right now, they've walked by Sunday and they see that you're slammed, and they think that maybe you guys don't have a care in the world, and that you're in the clouds above the fray. No. I want you to shed some light on what happens at a busy restaurant in New York. And I guess we've just learned that you're not immune to these challenges that restaurants face.
Sure.
How do you and the rest of your team, Todd, Adam, your other managers, how do you approach these things on a weekly or monthly basis? Get really detailed for me from an owner-operator perspective. How do these things affect you at a busy place?
For sure. Depending on season, obviously, as we ramp up for the warmer seasons, we can get outdoor seating. We project basically what our revenue goals are for a week, for the month, and then we see what the year might look like. So every week we're constantly looking at what we might make that week based on our history of that year. So we only have 2.5 years in, so we're looking back previous year to see kind of where we were at there, and then how far up percentage-wise we are for the year in some sort of trajectory idea. Then we'll start to base what we might make as our total, and then we'll start looking at what we can spend for labor, what we can actually spend. So it's I have a certain amount of hours and a certain amount of shifts that I can give away to cooks, and management's different because they're salary, but to line labor, right? So at that point, depending on where you're at in the season, there's only so many hours I can give away, because once you start hitting overtime for multiple people on your line level staff plus spread of hours, before you know it, you've lost $25,000 that month. But we're busy, right? We're making money. It's not that.
Right.
Before you know it, labor costs and food costs will wipe all that out. Before you know it.
Very quick. It can spiral very quickly.
We're talking weeks. It's not even 2-3 months. It's 2-3 weeks of having bad bad percentages.
I think what you've just illuminated is one of the things that I actually was totally unprepared for when we launched our own business, which was like,
Same.
I didn't realize that daily, weekly, how close attention you have to pay to every single aspect of every line item on your master pay attention to list.
We have a daily call-in with our managers about labor and food costs every day.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. That's definitely something that I think people would be surprised to hear, that like you're keeping such a close eye on it, especially in the New York City environment where people can be fickle. Weather can crush a week for you, and then you end up looking. You think to yourself, oh, well, like maybe March will be better than February. And you're like, well, actually February, we really need to batten the hatches down or whatever it might be, like to kind of literally weather the storm.
Yeah.
What other types of, if any, you guys are 2.5 years in, what kind of revenue streams have you guys thought up, looked at beyond the traditional, you do breakfast, you do brunch, and you do like a midday into dinner.
Into dinner,
Any thoughts on... Like, are you guys ever going to go full on lunch? Is there a discussion of like, I don't know, do you do private buyouts upstairs? Like, what kinds of other things have you guys as business people looked to that might not be super exciting from the chef perspective, but you as a business owner, you're like, all right, we got to do it.
Events, man. Events are a huge part of our revenue stream. You know, to go and delivery was always a part of the model. We were just trying to figure out the best way to put that out there, and you know what I mean, as far as like what is to go and what our packaging looks like, the value you get in that to go menu. You know, I think it's a big thing. So doing to go and delivery does help. If you make a couple $100s here and there, by the end of the week you have a couple thousand in the bank that, you know, you're paying for someone's salary right there. So it gives you a little bit more wiggle room.
Totally.
Events for sure. Events are like, you know, everyone in the industry knows it's easy money. Like, past hors d'oeuvres for an hour, cost this, open bar, all that, all the add-on things. Before you know it, like, it's a majority of our revenue source is events. And, you know, we have a challenging, tiny space, so we can't do the bigger events, which we get inquiries all the time for. It's just we can't. But the events, we do a ton of events, and it's, like, super important.
Do they drive you crazy, or have you learned to
in the beginning?
love them?
Yeah, in the beginning, yes. But like, you know, we developed a menu that was super easy to execute. You know, instead of doing plated for like 50 people, we do family style, and people love that. It makes it more casual. Makes it easier for people to kind of just mingle with each other and eat. That's the whole point of those events anyways. Like, you want people to communicate with each other, not stare down at their plates. So they're almost forced to talk to each other as they're grabbing food for each other. So family style definitely helps out and makes the service super easy. So we can do normal service on the first floor, and then we can do a buyout event on the second floor, just family style. And everyone's usually happy on both ends.
It seems like over time, as you've sort of solidified your role there, and you realize that you're part of it and that you weren't just consulting, that you did a lot of internal growth on what the optics of your food could potentially be.
Sure.
Not to put words in your mouth, but something along those lines. Is there any internal struggle left, thoughts about doing a tasting menu at the counter?
All day long, every day.
Are you ever thinking to yourself, Sunday in Brooklyn, either in its current incarnation or with a tweak, should be a Michelin star restaurant, and are you looking to achieve that?
Not at Sunday in Brooklyn, no. I think for us, we're more focused on attending to our neighborhood and our guests there. We want it to be as approachable as possible. For me, you know, the future is still, I want to do something elevated. I just need to express myself. I want to see how far I can go and push myself, and that's always been important to me. You know, just watching Matt kind of do things that blew my mind. I want to achieve that. Like, he inspires me to want to achieve that. So the difference is I don't want to do a tasting menu. The difference is I don't want a chef's counter. I don't want to do a tasting menu. I'm just tired of it. It's like a monotonous, ongoing thing, and like you get tired of it after a while. And I'm trying to conceptualize and think about a different way to do that. That's more fun, less predictable. I'm not sure what that is yet, and I've been thinking about it for a long time. But, you know, I've been looking for spaces for that, you know, for the foreseeable future, and I'm eventually going to do something I think that is elevated but more accessible, and I think that's important. Like, I want to cook for people of my income bracket, right? You know, like, I want everyone to be able to have a good time and an elevated experience. So that's kind of looming in the future. And we have a few projects that we're currently working on now that are kind of exciting as well.
Anything you can share? Or is it all top secret still?
One is not quite. It's almost there, so I can't quite talk about that one. But we are partnering
Staying in Brooklyn.
Greenpoint.
Okay, cool.
And then we're consulting and managing with doing a management contract with the Hoxton hotel group in LA. So we're working on all the concepts for their restaurants in that hotel, which is kind of fun.
What's the target date for that?
Years
away, or
no?
is it
It's maybe it's the fall this year.
Cool.
We'll see how it goes, but it seems like we're on track there. So we have a lot of kind of cool ideas working for that. That's exciting. The excitement of messing around with LA produce and that like kind of awesome seasonality and the quality of produce that's out there is pretty exciting.
The stuff you get year round in
Right?
LA that
Yeah.
you just can't really get here.
So that's exciting.
Pretty jealous
Yeah.
always when you stroll around those LA farmers markets and you're like, oh, cool, the strawberries are this good 12 months out of the year. What have you're 2.5 years in. What if you have an ability to define your leadership style at Sunday in Brooklyn? Has it changed a lot from Atera?
Oh my God, yeah.
What is it? And how? What do you think you're like now?
So at Atera, I had to learn on the spot how to be a manager and how to be a leader. So I futzed around with a couple of different styles, from hey, like we should all be friends and like keep it like a really good cohesive thing, into that's not really working. So I kind of drew a couple of inspired experiences from Victoria, my old sous chef, Matt. Like for me, I'm really intense about standards and what I perceive as the right way to do something. So for me, I always draw a line in the sand and I say, hey, listen, like I want to give you the knowledge to do your job well. And if I don't, I'm going to continue to give that knowledge till you do. But if I know you know and you still intentionally make a mistake and you're lazy about it, for me, you cross the line. And I always make sure that line is very, very clear. So I'm super intense about that. So I can be very intense, and I can be, especially at Atera, I was a little bit too much, right? That was a different environment with a different kind of, workforce with a different intention. We were trying to be one of the best restaurants in the world. So when you made a mistake, it was offensive to me. So I let you know about it, Casual kitchen, ton of green cooks. I was fortunate enough to, again, take some of my sous chefs from Atera. They followed me over, which was great. So I already had guys with the standard, but we had to approach it differently. So, I think the new cook that's coming out of school nowadays isn't like how it was when we kind of came up. Like we were cool to take a verbal beating. I was like, if I made a mistake and chef found out and he was pissed, I was cool with that. Like, you want to verbally assault me, I'll take that. Mm-hmm. But now I think it's different. The way that the new generation kind of takes in information, what they want to achieve so fast, you have to be different about it. And I think for me, it's more about mentoring and teaching and inspiring them to want it themselves. So giving them, chefs that inspire me, books to read. I'm like, hey, go read this, do that. Inspire them to want that perfection and want that standard on their own. Has really done for me as a manager wonders. Like they come in inspired to do it, not, hey, why the hell are you doing that wrong? What's wrong with you? Like, you're fucking retarded. Like, it's not that anymore. It's like, hey, did you read that book? How awesome was that about how he dealt with artichokes in this certain time of the year, right? Like, that was pretty cool, yeah? And like, yeah, I want to do that. I'm like, let's do it. Like I inspire people to be, I want the kitchen to be all-inclusive. I want everyone to have ideas, and I want them to add to the menu, and I want them to feel confident in themselves. So it's really about building confidence and structure and technique for them. So for me, I always remembered when you berate someone in service, you can't expect them to do a better job if you continuously berate them. They just go down so hard. They won't even be able to spell their name or tie their shoe at one point. Like, I remember feeling that way. If someone has a hard service and you get in their ear and you say, hey, listen, like, let it go. You're a fucking good cook. Like, you're going to get through this. And you inspire them to get through that moment. They become confident again. And then they start cooking better. So positive reinforcement is super important. And just teaching them and giving them knowledge, I think, inspires them to want that standard. So that's my approach now.
What's most satisfying to you about Sundays in Brooklyn? What makes you get up in the morning and keeps you coming back day after day to your restaurant?
it's like a relentless, challenging restaurant. Kitchen's kind of old. Everything's falling apart. My sous chefs are like trying to keep control of operations, kind of trying to keep the train on the tracks, and it's always busy. We never close. There's not even like time to breathe. And, it's inspiring to watch how hard they work and how dedicated they are to keeping everything together. Their ability to problem solve. The cook's doing a 9.5-hour freaking brunch shift. Like, no one likes that, and they're just sitting there just like busting through it. And I'm like, that's amazing. Their integrity, their like will to like push through. It's like, it's really inspiring. And to be honest with you, like, with my business partners and I, and, this is our first restaurant on our own. It's like really doing well. And like, that's not like a common thing that happens in New York. Usually New York eats you up and spits you out. So I feel very proud that we have a restaurant that is doing very well. It's thriving. People enjoy coming to our restaurant. I think that's an achievement. I feel really proud that we have a pretty successful restaurant so far in New York. It's hard to do that. That's inspiring.
Jaime, thanks so much for being here and sharing a little bit about your story and where you started and now where you are at your own spot at Sundays in Brooklyn. Tell people where they can find the restaurant. Where is it located and what's the website? Yeah, we're at 348 Wythe Avenue. The website is sundayinbrooklyn.com. We're in South Williamsburg, right around the block from the Domino Sugar Factory. Cool. Congrats on everything 2.5 years in and also all the new projects. Maybe we'll have you come back in a year or two and you can share a little bit more about some of those top secret projects. Everyone, thanks for listening. We'll have new episodes every Tuesday at 11 a.m. here on Heritage Radio.
Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. For our freshest content and to learn more about our 10-year anniversary celebration, subscribe to our newsletter. Enter your email at the bottom of our website, heritageradionetwork.org. Connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at heritage_radio. You can also find us at facebook.com/Heritage Radio Network. Heritage Radio Network is a nonprofit organization driving conversations to make the world a better, fairer, and more delicious place. And we couldn't do it without support from listeners like you. Want to be a part of the food world's most innovative community? Subscribe to the shows you like, tell your friends, and please, join the HRN family by becoming a member. Just click on the beating heart at the top right of our homepage. Thanks for listening.
Hey everybody, I'm Nick Layton.
And I'm Leah Bottima.
And we're the hosts of Were You Raised by Wolves?
Each week we try to make the world a kinder, nicer place.
Well, that's the idea, at least.
I mean, we try.
Have you ever wondered what to do if you're ghosted?
Or what to do when a friend asks you to borrow money?
Or the proper way to eat Cheetos?
You know, the big questions.
So please find Were You Raised by Wolves wherever you listen.